Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore the absolutely incredible mechanics behind how life sustains itself. We've got a fascinating journey ahead of us, starting all the way down at the level of microscopic DNA and building all the way up to complex human choices. Okay, let's kick things off with a fundamental biological puzzle. Think about this for a second. Basic life processes, like eating, breathing, and getting rid of waste, are completely essential, right? Without them, an individual organism simply dies. But reproduction? Reproduction actually isn't necessary to keep an individual alive. In fact, if an organism is going to create a whole new generation, a tremendous amount of its energy is going to be spent in that process. So why on earth would life spend so much energy making copies of itself when it could just use all that fuel to survive? Well, we're going to answer exactly that. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the purpose of reproduction. Then we'll look at the asexual solo strategy, followed by why sexual reproduction requires two. Next, how plants make seeds, then human reproduction and puberty, and finally, reproductive health and choices. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The purpose of reproduction, or as I like to call it, the blueprint of life. So the crucial takeaway here is that reproduction isn't just about making exact carbon copy clones. Organisms look similar because their body designs are similar, and those designs come from a biological blueprint, which is, of course, DNA. When cells reproduce, they use chemical reactions to build copies of that DNA. But here's the catch. No biochemical reaction is absolutely perfect. There are always slight, subtle variations. And you might wonder, why does this matter? Well, imagine a population of bacteria living happily in temperate waters. If global warming drastically spikes the water temperature, most of those bacteria are going to die out. But thanks to variation, a few rogue variants might just happen to be naturally resistant to heat. They survive, they grow, and they carry on the species. That inbuilt tendency for variation is literally the foundation for evolution and survival. Moving right along to Section 2, asexual reproduction, the solo strategy. One parent, many copies. It's pretty amazing, but a single organism can multiply rapidly without ever needing a partner. And the methods they use vary wildly based on their body design. Unicellular organisms might use fission. Simple multicellular ones like Spirogyra use fragmentation. They basically just break into pieces once they mature. Some plants use vegetative propagation, where parts like the root, stem, or leaves just sprout into entirely new plants. That's exactly why we can grow sugarcane or roses through grafting. And then you have bread mold, like rhizopus, which uses spore formation, releasing these tiny, thick-walled spores that just wait around for a nice, moist surface to grow on. It's really fascinating to see fission in action. Take the amoeba, for example. It's relatively unstructured, so when it divides, the splitting of the cell can basically happen in any direction. It just kind of pulls apart. But then look at Leishmania, the microscopic organism that causes Kala-Azar. It has a bit more organization, specifically this whip-like structure at one end. Because of that unique structure, its binary fission has to happen in a very definite specific orientation. It's a simple split for sure, but it is highly precise. And this builds up to even more complex solo strategies like regeneration. Consider the planaria. If this little guy is somehow cut or broken into multiple pieces, it doesn't just die. No. Specialized cells in each individual piece kick into overdrive, proliferating and transforming into various tissues. Literally, every single chopped up piece regrows into an entirely new, fully complete body. Talk about a real-life superpower. Which brings us to Section 3. Why 2? Sexual reproduction and the power of combination. So if asexual reproduction is so efficient, why did nature bother inventing a system that requires two totally different individuals? It all comes down to speed and survival. As we just learned, DNA copying mechanisms are actually fairly precise, which means generating variation is a really slow process in asexual reproduction. But if the environment changes rapidly, slow variation just isn't going to cut it. Sexual reproduction completely solves this by taking DNA that already has variations from previous generations and mixing it with the DNA of a totally distinct individual. By combining these, the population rapidly creates entirely novel combinations. It basically gives the species a much better, much faster toolkit for surviving unpredictable environments. But wait, this creates a massive mathematical problem. Think about it. If you combine the full DNA from parent A with the full DNA from parent B, the offspring gets double the DNA. The next generation would double it again, and pretty soon, you've got an absolute genetic traffic jam. To pull this off without doubling our DNA into oblivion, complex organisms evolved a slick trick called meiosis. This is a highly specialized cell division process that creates germ cells with exactly half the normal number of chromosomes and half the amount of DNA. That way, when two germ cells fuse, the original chromosome count is perfectly, beautifully restored. Now, as organisms got more complex, these germ cells had to specialize. If you're going to build a complex, highly specialized body, that initial single cell, the zygote, is going to need a ton of energy to get going. So, nature divided the labor. One germ cell became larger and packed to the brim with vital food stores. We call this the female gamete. The other germ cell became much smaller and highly motile, literally designed to travel to the female gametes, and this is the male gamete. Let's see this mechanism in action in Section 4, How Plants Make Seeds, from Flora to Fauna. This sequence highlights the beautifully logical journey of fertilization in flowering plants. First, the yellowish pollen, which is the male part, gets transferred by wind, water, or maybe a buzzing bee, and lands on the sticky stigma of a flower. But the journey's not over. A tiny tube actually grows out of that pollen grain, traveling all the way down the style like a little highway to reach the ovary at the very bottom. The male germ cell travels down this tube, fuses with the female gamete in the ovule, and boom, creates a zygote. This zygote then divides multiple times to form an embryo. The ovule develops a tough outer coat, and it eventually converts into a seed. It is an incredibly highly structured delivery system for the next generation. Now let's zoom in on the species we're probably most curious about, ourselves. Section 5, Human Reproduction and Puberty. Human beings obviously rely on sexual reproduction. But while a human is busy growing from a tiny baby to its adult size, all of the body's resources are intensely directed at just general physical growth. Getting taller, getting stronger, the maturation of reproductive tissue just isn't a priority yet. It's only later, during adolescence, that our general growth rate starts to slow down a bit, and the body shifts its resources toward maturing those reproductive systems. This very specific transitional period is what we call puberty. And puberty doesn't happen in secret. It comes with some very visible biological signals. Because humans are social creatures, the state of sexual maturity needs to be somewhat identifiable. We start seeing gradual changes, right? Thicker hair growing in new areas, skin getting oilier, which, sometimes leads to pimples. And then there are changes specific to biological sex, like breast size increasing and menstruation beginning in girls, or voices cracking and facial hair sprouting in boys. But it's super important to remember that these changes absolutely do not happen overnight. It is a slow, gradual biological rollout that varies a ton from person to person. Now, if an egg is fertilized, the human body has to step up and support the absolutely massive physical demands of growing a complex life form over 9 months. It does this through a true marvel of biology, the placenta. The placenta is essentially a brilliant biological life support system. It's a specialized disc of tissue embedded right into the uterine wall. On the embryo's side, it has these little structures called villi, and on the mother's side, there are blood spaces surrounding them. This setup creates a massive surface area, allowing essential glucose and oxygen to pass freely from the mother to the embryo, while simultaneously taking the waste generated by the growing embryo and transferring it back into the mother's blood for removal. Finally, let's talk about the real-world implications in Section 6, Reproductive Health and Choices, the Power of Choice. Here is a vitally, fundamentally important distinction we have to make. Biological maturation does not automatically equal mental readiness. Just because a body has gone through puberty and is technically biologically capable of reproducing, absolutely does not mean an individual is mentally or emotionally ready for the profound responsibility of a sexual act or raising a child. In the real world, we face immense pressures, don't we? Pressure from peers pushing us toward activities we might not actually want, and pressure from families pushing for marriage and kids. But pregnancy places an undeniably massive physical and emotional toll on a woman's body and mind. Stepping into that requires true personal readiness, not just a biological green light. On top of that, engaging in sexual acts brings the very real, very serious risk of transmitting diseases. We're talking about bacterial infections like gonorrhea and syphilis, or viral infections like warts and HIV/AIDS. Because this is our biological reality, preventive measures are an absolutely critical part of health management. Using a mechanical barrier, like a condom, is a highly effective way to help prevent the transmission of many of these infections. And thankfully, if an individual knows they aren't ready for the heavy demands of pregnancy, we aren't just at the mercy of our biology. We've devised various contraceptive methods that empower people to actively choose if and when they utilize their reproductive potential. This can be done through mechanical barriers that literally block the sperm from ever reaching the egg, or through oral pills that safely change the body's hormonal balance so that an egg isn't even released in the first place. These incredible tools allow us to actually manage our biology rather than being ruled by it. As we wrap up this explainer, think about the ground we've covered. We've gone all the way from the microscopic solo copying of DNA in an amoeba, through the brilliant structural design of plant seeds, right up to the heavy demands of human biology. But for us humans, the biology is really only half the story. The rest? That comes down to our choices. So I want to leave you with this crucial thought to chew on. Just because our bodies have the biological potential to reproduce, we must always stop and ask ourselves, are the body and the mind truly ready for the profound, life-altering responsibility that comes with it? Thanks for learning with me today, and keep exploring the incredible mechanisms of life.